Radio, the best entertainment money can't buy.
Makes you proud to be an American.
AM 1460 WVOX and WVIP HD2, New Rochelle.
Fox News Radio, I'm Dave Anthony. Not guilty. That's the plea in court this morning for a naturalized American citizen with ties to Iran accused in a busted-up terror plot.
Mansour al-Babsiar. He is the former Corpus Christi, Texas used car dealer. He is accused of being recruited by the Iranian Quds Force to assassinate the Saudi and Arabian ambassador to the United States while he was dining in a Washington, D.C. restaurant.
Fox's Eric Shawn outside the New York court. Also pleading not guilty today, a teenager accused of being a part of another plot led by an American woman nicknamed Jihad Jane. Fox News Radio's Steve Taylor, live in Washington.
The 18-year-old honors student from outside Baltimore named Mohammed Khalid is said to be the youngest suspect ever indicted in the U.S. for allegedly conspiring to help terrorists. Khalid was only 15 when he connected with Colleen LaRose, also known as Jihad Jane, on the Internet. He's charged with helping her raise money and find recruits for planned terror attacks in Europe and Asia. Khalid, born in Pakistan, says he didn't do it. Dave?
Steve, retaliation from Syria, pulling its ambassador out of Washington after the U.S. brought Ambassador Robert Ford home from Syria, fearing for his safety amid the deadly crackdown on anti-government protests. It is nighttime in earthquake-ravaged eastern Turkey, where some could still be trapped alive in the rubble. At least 270 are dead. Fox News Radio's Emily Wither monitoring live in London.
Dave, survivors are still being pulled out of the rubble a day after the earthquake struck. But with night setting in, everyone is pitching in.
It's my grandson's wife. She was stuck underneath rubble. So I figured I'd come here and look at the bodies to see if she's among them. That's why I'm here.
With over 1,000 people feared injured, the country is in shock. They've seen nothing like this for 10 years, and the tremors are still being felt, Dave.
Emily, on Wall Street, the Dow on the rise again today, coming off Friday's big rally. The Dow is up 90 points, just 100 away from 12,000. Fox News Radio, fair and balanced.
Hi, I'm a home. You know, where your heart is. Don't worry, I know how you feel about me. That's why you need to get me flood insurance. If you get homesick after a few days, imagine how a flood would make you feel. Just a few inches of water can cost tens of thousands of dollars in damage. And homeowners insurance doesn't cover floods. But in moderate to low-risk areas, flood insurance starts as low as $129 a year. Visit floodsmart.gov to learn how a flood could affect you.
Can't believe I'm pulling this off after all these years. So glad I got that personal loan from One Main Financial.
Can I take this blindfold off?
Let me help you.
We're going on a cruise.
No, dear. The honeymoon we never took.
You've made promises. We can help you keep them. We are One Main Financial, providing personalized loan solutions with flexible payment options. Go to onemainfinancial.com or call 1-855-321-MAIN. One Main Financial. Your needs, your goals, your dreams. Offer subject to restrictions and requirements of a licensee. For licensing information, visit our website or call us.
He lost in 2008. Now Mitt Romney's trying again in New Hampshire.
I just see Canada's signature right there. Okay, we'll just sign it right there.
That'll put Romney on the new Republican primary ballot in New Hampshire. He's way ahead in the polls there, but in a close race nationally with Herman Cain. President Obama's headed to Las Vegas to campaign and push his jobs bill. He'll do the same thing in California later. He's also pushing a new housing plan aimed at preventing more foreclosures. It would allow homeowners who have little or no equity refinance their mortgages if they are current on their payments. WikiLeaks is all plugged up, not publishing anything right now. Why? Fox News Radio's Jared Halpern explains live from Washington.
The secret-spilling website is facing private sector sanctions. Visa, MasterCard, Western Union, and PayPal have all refused to handle donations to WikiLeaks.
The most powerful players in the banking industry have shown themselves to be a politicized arm of right-wing Washington.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange says he's now trying to fight what he calls a blockade.
This collusion has occurred outside of any judicial or administrative process.
Assange is under legal pressure for publishing thousands of classified military secrets and State Department cables. He could also face sex crime charges in Sweden, Dave.
Jared Mattel has some new toys to play with. Thomas the Tank Engine and Bob the Builder, the toy maker buying the company that makes both, Mattel's biggest acquisition in a decade. Should college football players and other athletes getting scholarships get more money?
Between sports and classes, many college athletes just don't have time for a part-time job. So the president of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, is supporting a plan to increase their grants by $2,000 to, as he puts it, more closely approach what college actually costs, beyond the tuition, fees, room, board, and books covered by scholarships. Emmert's also asking the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics to let schools give out grants on a multi-year basis instead of 1 year at a time. Chris Foster, Fox News Radio.
Game 5 of the World Series is tonight. The Rangers and Cardinals all tied up. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News Radio.
WVOX and WVIP HD2, New Rochelle.
Tune in to Jazz Plus with Greg Thomas, Sunday at 4 p.m., right here on WVOX. Expect iconic jazz masters and new recordings from the best jazz artists of today on Jazz Plus with Greg Thomas, here, Sundays at 4 p.m.
He can be assertive. We're coming up on the end of the school year, Sarah. And what are you most concerned about, and how did your students do it getting into colleges? He can be a little bit funny. That was fun talking to college kids, especially as politically incorrect as I can be.
I'm not even going to respond to that.
And he can also be just downright silly. You know, he keeps the Johnny Pump in his...
Oh, stop. Oh, stop.
Good Morning Westchester with Bob Marone. 6 a.m. weekdays. The latest Westchester news, weather, and traffic on 1460 WVOX and WVOX.com, the #1 community station.
Every day, New Yorkers depend upon the clean and reliable electricity provided by Indian Point. On an average day, Indian Point provides about a quarter of the electricity for New York City and Westchester at lower cost than other power plants and helps our efforts to improve air quality. You have a right to know the facts about Indian Point, because when talk turns to extending the licenses of these plants, we all need to remember how important Indian Point is to New York. For instance, did you know that without Indian Point's lower cost power, our electric rates would be much higher? And that an equivalent gas-fired power plant would pour millions of tons of pollutants a year into the air we breathe? And that the independent experts in charge of New York's electric grid have said that the city could face rolling blackouts without Indian Point? I'm Teresa Motko, and I'm an engineer here at Indian Point, and my family and I live in the area. All of us have a right to know why Indian Point is right for New York. Visit rightfornewyork.com for answers.
From the historic city of New Rochelle, home of Flynn Berner, Cooper Caldwell, Peter Parenti, and the Sound Shore Medical Center of Westchester, the great and growing hospital for you and yours.
You're listening to America's great community radio station from Westchester, the Golden Apple. This is WVOX Worldwide, AM 1460 and WVOX.com.
1460 WVOX.
From Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, this is The Rabbi and the Judge, with Rabbi Amiel Wall, the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Israel of New Rochelle, and the Honorable Judge Sam Fredman. You can join the Rabbi, the Judge, and their guests at 914-636-0110. Now, the Rabbi and the Judge. Here's Rabbi Amiel Wall and the Honorable Judge Sam Fredman.
Well, we're very happy to be with you today, and Judge Sam Fredman will be back with us next Monday. Today we have our Middle East expert, Barbara Fix, in as our moderator, and we're very, very pleased that you're listening. And, of course, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, you can call us at 636-0110. 636-0110. That's an area code 914. So I asked Barbara to introduce our special guest today, Marion Bolshon.
Marion, welcome on the show. Your story will be fascinating for our listeners, as has been your book for me. You are of origin, as people will hear from your accent. You were born in
Budapest,
and you lived through very turbulent times. In fact, on March the 19th in 1944, towards the end of the traumas that the world endured at the hand of the Nazis, Eichmann and the Germans arrived in Hungary. And you have devoted many, many hours of your life to telling your story. You have been an inspiration to school children. I know that you travel around the country telling your story. And I wondered how you focus your story and what is the message. Can you give us briefly what is your story and what do you hope to achieve by telling the story?
Thank you very much for having me. My story is very interesting and a little bit different from any other Holocaust survivor. I was born and raised in Budapest, Hungary. I had a wonderful education in the Jewish Gymnasium of Hungary. And just before the end of my school years, before matriculation, I got engaged to my first husband. We had a wonderful life. I had a wonderful life as a child. My parents gave me all privileges that were offered in Budapest. I was a dancer. I skated. I did all the social and also schooling possibilities that could be gotten in Budapest that time. And I'm still very proud of it because I still thrive on it. I got engaged and we were supposed to get married. My husband that time was in the labor force. The Hungarian labor force consisted of Hungarian Jewish boys who did not join the army because they weren't taken into the army. It was labor force, what meant that they did not have a uniform, they didn't have any weapons. All they had is a yellow armband and the hat of the army. And instead of weapons, they had instruments to build roads. They were sent out mostly to the Russian border because the Russian army was already advancing toward Budapest. I was supposed to get married in the spring of 1944. And then my husband, my that time fiancé, got 3 days leave. So he said, well, why don't we get married? And it just so happened that that day became April 5th, 1944. But before that, the beginning of the end for you young people in Hungary was 1944, March 19. That day, it was a beautiful spring Sunday. The German army started to march through the bridges of Budapest. Buda and Pest are divided by the Danube and they are connected by bridges. The army was marching in, and so did Adolf Eichmann, who was the one who was designated by Hitler to have the final solution for the Hungarian Jews. Now, this was 11 months before the war ended. And in 11 months, they accomplished killing 600,000 Jews in Hungary. So the story goes on with me that we did get married that day, and there was no synagogue anymore because the Gestapo had their horses in the synagogue. But my grandfather was around and he had a talit, and I invited some neighbors because we couldn't invite anybody else. And in my parents' building on a terrace, as Orthodox Jews do, under the open sky, with a talis over our head, we got married. That was the day when the law started against Jews. The first one was to have a Jewish star, yellow Jewish star, sewed onto the overgarment, like a coat or a jacket. So when I got married, after the ceremony, I decided that that Jewish star is not going to be my outer garment. So I threw away the coat and I never wore it again. It's not because I didn't want to be Jewish, because I was a very proud Jew and I still am. But I did not want to be identified as a Jewish person and know that that means death. So from that day on, I started my life. I took my life into my hands and started my life on my own. I was 18 years old.
Marion, you describe in your book a wonderful life, and almost took you by surprise the fact that as you said, at the end of the war, that the Germans had marched in and did such damage. There was a high degree of assimilation of the Jews into Hungarian culture, and yet there was a huge amount of anti-Semitism. Tell us about the Arrow Cross, because that was the Hungarians themselves.
Yes, but before that, when the Nazis marched in and brought in all the laws against Jews and had the young Jewish men in the labor force and started in the provinces to ship people to the camps. In Budapest, there was a very big enclave of Hungarian Jews, and they were quite assimilated because the government of Budapest, who was Miklos Horthy, who was the governor, was very interested in Jewish people. He had bankers, he had lawyers, he had a lot of Jewish people in his circle, and so the anti-Semitism in Budapest was really not prevalent. It was much more in the provinces where my father's and mother's family were. So in Budapest there was a way of getting away with it. Now the Arrow Cross came later. The Arrow Cross was, but we didn't know about it. The Arrow Cross took power on October 15, 1944. And that's when every hoodlum, every young person had a machine gun, and all they did is hunted Jews. And whoever the Nazis didn't take yet, they certainly finished up. Their leader was the name of Szálasi, and of course he was the first one that after liberation was hung on a lamppost in Budapest. But that didn't bring back the people anymore. So the Nazis themselves were bad, but the Arrow Cross, if possible, was even worse. And that time, when the Arrow Cross came, I did a different way of surviving. But before that, in June, there came a news that a young Swedish man by the name of Raoul Wallenberg came to Budapest with the sole purpose of saving Hungarian Jews in Budapest. And because of his charisma and charm and fantastic personality, he saved a lot of Jews in Budapest, including my little family. My little family existed of my father, my mother, and me, and my then husband, and we all got what they called a Swedish Schutzpass. Do you know anything about that?
I do know about it because we've actually had on this radio show, Rabbi Wall had organized for the Wallenberg Foundation to speak. We had Rachel Bernheim come and talk about Wallenberg, who should be everybody's hero. It should be known to all school children what courage is, because Wallenberg was not a Jew. He was, as Lutheran. You said, he was Lutheran. So what would possess a man whose own life was not threatened to be so courageous and to use his power? He knew that he was at risk, and the end of the story is a tragic story because you were in Hungary. You were kind of caught between the Germans and the Russians, and of course compounded by the Arrow Cross. So you were fleeing in all different directions trying to escape. I mean, it must have been a horror story. And here comes this amazing knight in shining armor by the name of Raoul Wallenberg and creates what you call these passes to give protection.
He did not only that, but he bought up apartment buildings in Budapest, and he hung out the Swedish flag. And those buildings were protected buildings. Now, my parents survived there.
We're going to take a break now. We're at a fascinating point, and we'll come back to that as we interview Marion Bolshon about her experiences in Budapest, Hungary.
news at 20 minutes past the hour, every hour. Here's the latest update from the Fox Business Network on WVOX Worldwide and WVIP HD2.
From the Fox Business Network, stocks continuing to trade higher on reports that Europe's bailout fund will be larger than anticipated, and also amid a flurry of M&A activity here stateside. Now, just past 1 p.m. Eastern, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 0.2%, 75 points. The Nasdaq posting bigger gains, up more than 2% on the day. Mattel on track with its biggest deal in a decade. Mattel is buying the company behind Thomas the Tank Engine and Bob the Builder. The price tag, $680 million in cash. Sara Lee selling the majority of its North American food service coffee and tea operations to J.M. Smucker for $350 million. It's Sara Lee's latest effort to slim down ahead of its split into two companies. And Harley-Davidson is recalling more than 300,000 motorcycles. The company says it will fix a switch problem that can cause the brake lights to fail and possibly even the rear brakes themselves. The recall affects touring, CVO touring, and trike motorcycles. With the Fox Business Report, I'm Robert Gray.
Can't believe I'm pulling this off after all these years. So glad I got that personal loan from One Main Financial.
Can I take this blindfold off?
Let me help you.
We're going on a cruise.
No, dear. The honeymoon we never took.
You've made promises, we can help you keep them. We are One Main Financial, providing personalized loan solutions with flexible payment options. Go to onemainfinancial.com or call 1-855-321-MAIN. One Main Financial. Your needs, your goals, your dreams. Offer subject to restrictions and requirements of a licensee. For licensing information, visit our website or call us.
Welcome to Free Radio.
Free.
No download fees, no subscription fees, and
is accepted by the American Dental Association.
WVOX Worldwide and WVIP HD3.
Every day for you and yours, 1460 WVOX.
Now back to the Rabbi and the Judge on 1460 WVOX with Rabbi Amiel Wall, the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Israel of New Rochelle, and the Honorable Judge Sam Fredman. Now, once again, the Rabbi and the Judge on 1460 WVOX.
Well, we're very happy to report that Judge Sam Fredman will be back next Monday, and you can call in at 636-0110, area code 914, and we have Barbara Fix, our regular panel participant here, Middle East expert, and we have a special author and guest, Marion Bolshon. And you were just in the middle of an important question with Marianne, were you not?
We were talking with Marianne about the importance of a hero by the name of Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat who made it his mission to save Jews from the horrendous tragedies of the Holocaust. And you were talking about the Schutzpass and the purpose of what the achievements of Raoul Wallenberg were.
Yeah, when we heard about Raoul Wallenberg's arrival in Budapest, then of course we went to the help that he provided. He issued pieces of paper like they call it Schutzpass, what means saving, like a passport. You had your picture on it and identification and the Swedish crown on top of the page. And whoever had that piece of paper was supposed to be protected by the Swedish king and the Swedish government. Of course, this was all just fabricated, but it certainly saved a lot of lives in Budapest. The first recipient of this in my little family was my father. My father, a couple of weeks after the Germans marched in, what was March 19, 1944, in April it was Passover and also Easter. I went back to my parents' home from wherever I was before, and early in the morning the Gestapo knocked on the door and they demanded to take my father away. That time they took him to a gathering camp, what right above Budapest on a mountain in a very nice hotel, what they called the gathering camp, what was really before they took them to camps in like Auschwitz. And then we heard about Raoul Wallenberg and the miraculous paper. So we sent a messenger with the paper to where my father was, and lo and behold, those terrible Gestapo people honored that piece of paper. And the next morning, my father was on our threshold. He was gaunt and beaten and hungry, but he was alive. That was the first miracle Wallenberg did in my little family. Then much, much later, when we were already hiding, even me and my husband, in the air raid shelter or the basement of the Swedish legation, because he had a building designated as the Swedish legation. And we were all in the basement because by then the Russians were at the door and the air raids were going all day long, and nobody lived upstairs anymore in the half-bumped out building. One morning, my husband decided that he's going to shave. I mean, that was a big thing because they didn't have water or anything. And I decided to go up on the second floor where we had a switchboard operated, and we changed whoever was operating the switchboard. And as I went upstairs, all of a sudden I looked out on the hall of this building, what used to be a window, and I saw that a whole Gestapo brigade was going into the basement, and 2 minutes later the whole so-called Swedish Jews, about 100 of them, including my husband, were marched out on the snowy streets of Budapest. By then there was no camp, no nothing. They just took them to the Danube and they shut them in, and the blue Danube became the red Danube. So they were marching, and we, with my friend, contacted Raoul Wallenberg's office. And that minute Raoul Wallenberg took his chauffeur and his car and went out to the Danube and started screaming at these horrible Gestapo people. You cannot take these people with you. These are my people. They are all under Swedish legation's care, and they are Swedes, and you cannot take them. And he asked people, show your papers. Well, who had papers? But they showed whatever they had in their pockets. And lo and behold, they did honor him. And 2 hours later, the whole so-called Swedish Jews, including my husband, were marching back into the basement of the Swedish legation. That was the second miracle that Raoul Wallenberg, my hero, did for our family. The third miracle happened to my grandfather, and I did not know that until after the war. Raoul Wallenberg supposedly had a meeting with Adolf Eichmann, who was the henchman for the final solution in Hungary, and that was about 2 days before the Russians liberated us. And Eichmann wanted to blow up the ghetto, and that's where my grandfather was, in Budapest. And somehow, God knows how, Wallenberg persuaded this killing, horrible Eichmann not to blow up the ghetto. We think he threatened him that when the Russians come, then he will be probably the first victim of the Russians. And lo and behold, he did not blow up the ghetto. So after a few days after liberation, my husband and me and my parents showed up in my parents' home, and 2 days later my grandfather came. So 3 generations of my little family was saved because of this fantastic man, Raoul Wallenberg. And a few years ago, my second husband decided, he was an American Jew from Ohio, that he didn't know anything about the Hungarian Jews. And why don't I start telling him? So I started taping the stories, and that is how the book came about. And when the book was published, then I was started to be invited all over the United States to speak about it. And then now it's my mission to speak about it, to teach it to children, to university students, to whoever wants to listen. Because a hero like Raoul Wallenberg should be remembered and should be known by everybody. Unfortunately, when the Russians came in, for God knows what reason, nobody ever found out, the Russians took him in a big car, and they said probably for questioning, or we never knew. And they took him to the Gulag, and he perished there, unknown to any one of us how, when, and why.
Such a sad ending. I mean, you had 3 miracles in your life, but such a sad ending to Raoul Wallenberg. We're going to take a break, and then I have some questions for Marion Bolshon about her experiences at the hands of the Nazis and the Russians were also invading Hungary, and how she managed to survive with her family in Hungary.